Hello, my name is Leah Exum, and today I'm going to be talking about the role of religion in the Black Liberation Movement. The Black Liberation Movement is the struggle of the Black community to achieve self-determination and freedom from oppression by dismantling systemic racism. Under this umbrella of Black liberation, I'm going to be talking about the role of religion in the abolitionist movement, the civil rights movement, and contemporary movements. In Chapter 7 of Religion and Politics in America by Fowler, they say that African Americans are overwhelmingly Christian and mostly evangelical. While over half of all African Americans, for example, consider themselves born again Christians and biblical literates. Moreover, religious salience is quite high in the African American community. 85%, more than in any other demographic or ethnic group, say that religion is important in their lives, and a sizable majority say that they attend worship services at least once a week. One of my professors once said that you can't have a conversation about Black people without talking about religion, which is very true. The Black church is embedded in a lot of Black people's lives. There's also like spirituality that's very deeply rooted in a lot of African American communities. So first up, we're going to be talking about the abolitionist movement. The movement started in the mid 18th century and technically ended in 1865 with the signing of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery with the exception of imprisonment. The goal of the abolitionists was to free Africans from slavery. The abolitionist movement essentially took off and gained more momentum, especially after the Second Great Awakening, which was centered around the more emotional aspects of religion rather than book-heavy theology, and focused on this idea of being more Christ-like and while also embracing this new Western frontier. Slavery directly contradicted the professed political ideals of Christian beliefs. A group that was big and propelling in helping the abolitionist movement were evangelicals, which is also a big influence on African Americans today. A key figure in the movement was Frederick Douglass, who was a gifted political orator as well as a Methodist minister and, of course, a Black abolitionist. He served time as a lay preacher in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, and that church also included Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, who were both very important to the movement and spreading this message of freeing slaves. Frederick Douglass also delivers this key speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, where he's basically pointing out the hypocrisy of claiming America to be this free country whilst having enslaved people, which again goes back to contradict the very foundation and idea of America being a land of the free. Another figure I wanted to talk about is Angelina Grimke, or Grimke, who was an abolitionist who wrote Appeal to Christian Women of the South, which advocated for women's suffrage as a means to help the abolitionist movement. She advocates for anti-slavery. She uses a lot of Christian rhetoric and a lot of Bible verses and stories and ideas to basically establish her authority as a Christian person and a Christian woman, a good Christian woman, and show how slavery can be very immoral and how allowing slavery and not actively fighting against it is very ungodly, very unchristian-like. She also uses this idea of America being a free republic to also point out the hypocrisy of having slaves in a land of the free, very similar to Frederick Douglass's speech. Another religious group that helped out with the abolitionist movement and arguably spearheaded it in a lot of ways were the Quakers. Their beliefs are very much egalitarian, and they believe that God loves everybody no matter their race, sex, gender, status. God loves them. Therefore, the idea of slavery, which is so hate-filled and so dehumanizing, very much went against their whole ideals. So much so that in 1776, Quakers expelled slaveholding members, and soon anti-slavery societies would start to spring up in support of abolition. In the end, the role of religion in the abolition movement was to motivate people to actually go forward with abolishing slavery and advocating for it, as well as justifying anti-slavery rhetoric. In some ways, religion was used to justify slavery, but in the end, if you were a Christian and you looked at the Bible, there was no way you could really justify slavery when it's supposed to teach you love. Moving on, we're going to talk about the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement spanned from 1954 to 1968 with a goal to end segregation and Jim Crow. It gained traction after the Brown versus the Board of Education trial, which ruled that the separate but equal ruling that came from Plessy and Ferguson was actually unconstitutional, and this basically sparked hope in the Black community that there could be Black liberation in America. In this movement, the Black community demanded that every person get equal opportunity in things like voting, employment, housing, and just access to public spaces. So churches became essential to Black communities as they were places for spiritual support, social services, and also a place to politically organize. An important figure in the Civil Rights Movement was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was a Baptist minister as well as a political activist who fought for Black liberation. King used religious teachings to inspire nonviolence against systemic racism, which was very similar to the approach that Gandhi used to face oppression. He also turned religious spaces into places/centers for political revolution. Dr. King helped organize the Freedom Rides in 1961, March on Washington in 1963, and the marches from Selma to Montgomery in 1965. Dr. King's incorporation of religion in fighting systemic oppression very much mirrors Black liberation theology, which interprets Christianity through a lens of freedom from oppression, and very much highlights how the revolutionary role of religion for the Black community in general. Another important religion that played a role in the Civil Rights Movement was Islam, specifically from the Nation of Islam, which was founded by Wallace D. Fard Muhammad and was later succeeded by Elijah Muhammad. Their mission statement is to teach the downtrodden and defenseless Black people a thorough knowledge of God and themselves. The Nation of Islam combined teachings from the Quran with Black nationalism, which was basically about Black power and self-determination, which appealed to a lot of Black people because it was finally a time where a religion was specifically centered around Black people. In the Nation of Islam, they also taught Black superiority, which was basically that Black people are like supreme beings, and it's kind of messed up and crazy how oppressed Black people have been. And in that regard, they also say that the white man is the devil, which comes up later as a critique. Now, unlike Martin Luther King Jr., the Nation of Islam argued for a more separatist approach to the Civil Rights Movement and basically wanted Black people to have their own communities where they controlled the economics and they controlled the culture and basically reject white American culture in general. A key figure in the Nation of Islam for a while was Malcolm X, who led his own mosque in Harlem, New York. In an autobiography of Malcolm X, you actually get to read about his conversion from Christianity to Islam. And by extension, you get to see why the Nation of Islam appealed to many African Americans. And that reason is basically the Nation of Islam called out the system for being racist and was very much empowering as it told Black people to embrace who they were and not kneel to the white man. Islam is also a very inclusive religion to begin with. Later, Malcolm X would actually leave the Nation of Islam due to internal conflicts, as well as being very suspicious of the foundations of the Nation of Islam. And another thing that sparked him to leave is when he actually took his first pilgrimage to Mecca, where he saw how inclusive the Muslim community was, and he even notes that he never thought he could be genuine friends with a white person until he was at Mecca and saw Muslims of every single color and background. And so, though he started a stark separatist under the Nation of Islam, as he got to be more familiar with the Islamic culture, he actually started to understand being more inclusive in fighting for civil rights. Though the Nation of Islam has some very well-deserved critiques for being anti-Semitic, being separatist is very controversial, and the fact that Elijah Muhammad was a terrible person, to put it lightly, the Nation of Islam still played a really huge role in Black empowerment, which was very important during the Civil Rights Movement. Today, the Nation of Islam is still alive and is led by Louis Farrakhan, who still preaches militant separatism, Black superiority, and self-reliance. And he's been criticized very similarly to Elijah Muhammad for being anti-Semitic, as well as promoting these traditional moral values, which can be very much sexist. With all the momentum, struggle, and fight of the Civil Rights Movement and help from religious figures, eventually the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, followed by the Voting Rights Act in 1965, which were big moves to actually getting the equality that the Black community wanted. The role of religion in the Civil Rights Movement was as a source of refuge and empowerment, comparatively to the abolition movement, which used religion mostly to justify the movement. Religion in the Civil Rights Movement was used as a source of empowerment to help motivate people to go forward with this movement, because it was a really tough struggle fighting for everyone's rights. Lastly, I'm going to be focusing on the contemporary Black liberation movements and the role in religion. First, I wanted to focus on the Black Lives Matter movement, which was founded in 2013 and gained momentum in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. The Black Lives Matter movement focuses on divesting from the police, and instead of funneling that money to the police, actually putting that money into minority communities and uplifting them. And there is an emphasis on Black communities. The Black Lives Matter group is more secular, as it tries to include people from all walks of life. There are a couple reasons for their secularism. One that I already mentioned is that they wanted to be more inclusive. Another is that they very much are questioning the origins of Christianity and considering that a lot of slaves were more forced into Christianity as a means of survival. Though the BLM movement is secular, I found an interesting article. Christopher A. House, who is a religion and communication scholar, suggests that many BLM activists self-identify as spiritual but not religious, and their activism is animated by a deep spirituality that is personal yet not connected traditionally to a religious institution. I just thought that was interesting because it goes back to that idea of you can't have a conversation about Black people without talking about religion in some way. And though BLM may not be tied to any religion, nor any of its people tied to any specific religious institution, there is still a deep spirituality that runs through a lot of these people. Even though popular movements like BLM are more secular, religious institutions are still doing advocacy work and are still very important in the Black community. For example, in response to Trump's dismantling of DEI initiatives, Reverend Al Sharpton hosted a buy-in at Costco, which very much doubled down on advocating for DEI in their company, unlike some other companies like Target, who immediately took Black products off the shelf. Basically, this buy-in was to show support to companies that would also stand by the Black community. By integrating faith with a commitment to social justice, African American religious communities challenge established systems of power and champion a vision of a more just society. And that's a great thing for everybody. Anyways, thank you so much for watching my video, and also thank you for such an amazing, wonderful year of learning. I'm very glad I got to take this class. It gave me some new insight to a lot of things, and especially how religion plays into politics and revolutions. And it was just very cool. Thank you.